intimate lives, behaviors, and sexualities of young black women in Philadelphia and New York at the turn of the 20th century was scrutinized, restricted, and criminalized by authorities and by legal mandate. She questioned the perspectives of official accounts left behind by sociologists, photographers, vice investigators, parole officers, and court officials, all of which classified the movements of black women as deviant, as failing to match scripts of respectability, as anathema to the forces of social good. Hartman reconstructs the lives of these wayward subjects, the scapegoats of white anxiety, and presents counter-narratives that propose personal experiences strategically excluded from the archives. Through a process of critical fabulation, incorporating historical record and reasoned speculation, she composes rich stories of desire and potentiality, resistance and refusal, imagining the quotidian histories of these women as seen through their own eyes and told in their own voices. The resulting testimonies reclaim these discarded women as radical thinkers who tirelessly imagined other ways to live and never failed to consider how the world might be otherwise. Hartman depicts her protagonists as agentive, facing down daily acts of racial and sexual terror, and not as tragic victims of their own willful proclivities. I relate the premise of waywardness to the context of speculative African futurism by highlighting Eugen Blackrock's deviations from genre convention. I have already discussed the artist's nonlinear navigation of spatial-temporal constraints, an approach that enables her to inhabit and create worlds of coincident pasts, present, and futures. I now draw attention to the way that Blackrock expresses overlapping and simultaneously conceived aspects of her own identity. With the track Obsidian Night, Blackrock confesses an ability to transform to different beings like in a dream, embracing subconsciously the hero and the fiend, prevailing in a space of allegory as a myth, a contradiction in the scene. The impulse to reevaluate such divisions, to bring forth incommensurate polarities and nurture them within one being, features most prominently in the track Gorgon Madonna. Recall the Greco-Roman myth in which Athena punishes her daughter Medusa for inciting Poseidon to sexual assault. Athena transforms the young girl into a hideous Gorgon with a nest of serpents for hair, ensuring that all who gaze upon her turn to stone. Remember as well the Madonna-whore dichotomy that posits women as either dutifully chaste or wildly promiscuous, a theory explaining the desire to prescribe women's sexuality and expression within a heteronormative, heterocorrective, and patriarchal frame. Blackrock overturns these injunctions, reveling in the creation and embodiment of a never-before-seen Gorgon Madonna, an ambidextrous androgen, both the empress and the king, testosterone and estrogen, she is all things encoding. As the song progresses, the past, present, and future stay similar, while Blackrock's Medusa character exemplifies both the monstrous and the divine, enacting an embrace of our terribleness, a transfiguration of the given, to quote Saidiya Hartman. Eugen Blackrock imaginatively reclaims those behaviors that would normally elicit stringent, strident censure.
Mais ce soir, il y a un spectacle. Très grand. Venez si vous voulez.
That's radio waves. Like something out of space.
Welcome to the room.
It is written, be the space at the center. Be nothing.
Staring at these pages, mine stay purple. Mercury's in retrograde, circles in a circle, what's the purpose? Slagging these rhymes like a merchant, handwritten in cursive. Lately I've been staring at these pages, mine stay purple. Mercury's in retrograde, circles in a circle, what's the purpose? Yeah. 360, spiral the neck like a vulture goddess. Milky Way patterns and the energies I harness in my mindset. I'm high as the sky gets, multiple sunsets, capturing thoughts with a butterfly net. Cause true reality runs deeper than the concept. To the spectrum of your consciousness, your pigments, only context. This race can only be won if the psyche is steady. Even Frankenstein began as a dream in the mind of Mary Shelley, so throw caution to the wind. Focusing the mental element, make walls crumble down like dilapidated settlements. Although threatened with hell, I'll blast for the self first. Splatter the optics and damage.
Acknowledging the variety of ways in which women branded as errant, fugitive, or troublesome might demonstrate waywardness, Saidiya Hartman stresses that to actively engage in waywardness is a continual and intentional process. She contends that waywardness is an ongoing exploration of what might be, the untiring practice of trying to live when you were never meant to survive. The album from which these musical examples are drawn, Eugen Blackrock's 2019 Anima Mysterium, affords a sustained thematic exegesis of her character within and across its 12 autonomous tracks. All the songs adhere to the complementary aesthetics of African futurism and an Afro-mythic mode of storytelling, and all of them describe the practice of waywardness in their voracious and dedicated explorations of Black possibility. It was actually in 2018 that Blackrock first caught the attention of international audiences with a guest appearance on the Black Panther soundtrack album produced by Kendrick Lamar. What I've identified as a certain waywardness persists in her guest verse on the track Ops. Blackrock's line, "Roar like a lioness, punch like a cyborg," references Muhammad Ali's famous boast, "Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee," reinterpreting the phrase from a combined Afro-mythic and African futurist perspective. Invoking the boxer Ali, singer Millie Jackson, and senior Black Panther Party member Kathleen Cleaver, Blackrock mobilizes the hip-hop praxis of artists equating their own prowess to that of eminent historical figures. This move establishes Blackrock's position in a lineage of wayward Black American figures, calling attention to the unremitting and unresolved nature of Black subjugation globally.
I move like a...
Great.
I move like a millipede. When I flex them tendons like rubber trees. Young Millie Jackson, back to the shit. Mouthpiece drawn, got a verbal armor. Stack bodies, not figurines. Move beneath the surface, submarine. I'm half machine, obscene with the light sword. Look inside the brain, it's a riot in the psych ward. What you standing on the side for? Roar like a lioness, punch like a cyborg. Spit slick, attack is subliminal. Flowers on my mind, but the rhyme style sinister. Stab behind my own bars like a seasoned criminal. Gotham City streets outplaying the... Crushing any system that belittles us. Antidote to every poison they administer. Switching like time signatures, colors in my aura tend to cover the perimeter. Brown bodies that the bruise wanna shoot through. High res lenses wanna roll over your eyes. My strength ain't nothing like my size. Blades on the top, Kathleen Cleaver. Tangle my cords like a weaver.
So although Kendrick Lamar and Vince Staples also contribute verses to this track, only Blackrock makes substantive reference to Black engagement with technology and the prosthetically enhanced future of Mark Derry's original description. Blackrock's participation in Lamar's ostensibly Afrofuturist project illustrates that the two modalities of Afrofuturism and African futurism are by no means mutually exclusive. But Blackrock's intervention here establishes powerful linkages between hip-hop practice, an inherently referential form, nevertheless originating in the United States, Afro-mythology, and African futurism. And just as the definition of Afrofuturism has been extended by scholars such as Alondra Nelson, what constitutes Afrofuturism stemming from Africa, or an African-based Afrofuturism, has also come under strenuous debate. Ben Okri's melding of myth, spirituality, and realism in his fictional works might best be categorized as Afro-surrealism. An appreciation of Credo Mutwa's writing is tainted by the inability of early readers to distinguish between myth and outright fabrication, if not by the author's open collusion with the apartheid government. Nnedi Okorafor refers to her oeuvre as African futurist, one word, and or African jujuist. Whether animated by the legacies of physical dislocation and the barbarism of enslavement, as in the case with Afrofuturism, or the longue durée of colonialism and dispossession, as with African futurism, the speculative outcomes of these respective genres tend towards either abject nihilism or optimism, dystopia or utopia. These perspectives are in turn reflected by the theoretical opposites of Afro-pessimism or Black optimism, necropolitics or an African rising. In this presentation, I've considered Eugen Blackrock's work through the lens of Saidiya Hartman's waywardness to illustrate how the artist defies spatial temporal genre conventions and why these ideological distinctions are necessary. Blackrock's vision of future pasts and concurrent looming presence is neither negative nor positive, but instead it is ambivalent. Because the oppression of Black life transcends time and place, so too must Black resistance and Black imaginations of alterity. The analytic after robot offers, I think, a when and a where to situate the metaphorical and metaphysical space-time at which and in which Yugen Blackrock's Afro-mythic, African futuristic provocations occur. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Warrick, for that wonderful presentation. Just I'll come here so I can have a better panoramic view of the room. And we have about just under 15 minutes for questions and comments, if anybody would like to.
We could also just listen to more music.
We can also listen to more music, yeah. I certainly wouldn't want to impose, an academic ethos on the proceedings.
I'm just trying not to answer
But yeah, we
questions.
can listen to some. I could listen to those tracks all day. So, any questions or?
Great. Rich, yeah.
Sorry, that was good.
I thought it was out of here.
I had mine prepared.
The music was amazing, though. Thank you for exposing me to some of those amazing tracks.
Sure.
So I think one of the questions about the definitional, I think we have to admit that a part of the kind of controversy around African and Afrofuturism is the definitional controversy that seems to be going back and forth. I'm less interested in that because I really appreciated the way that you treated both the lineage of the concept and its usage and deployment across the literature between different camps without portraying them as necessarily antagonistic, though some of them are antagonistic. And so what I'll start with is some of my interests, particularly, so next week I'm presenting on, I have a talk called Beyond Wakanda Futurism, right? And long story short, not long story short, but part of that is an exploration of the use of the concept of diaspora by people like Kwadwo Eshun and John Okomfora in the 1990s. And what's particular about that community of artists was that they often indexed Afrofuturism. They're all located in the UK, in London.
Mm-hmm.
They're all first generation Black UK Black, and many of them are African descendants, right? Their parents are from Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, and other places. And a lot of them are Caribbeans, right? From the Caribbean as well, but their reference and their frame around Afrofuturism was again invoking people like George Clinton and Sun Ra, and I'm wondering how we can think about maybe the translocality of that, right? African, there was no desire in that moment to claim African futurism as distinct from Afrofuturism, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we can point to perhaps the Black Panther as a point where that becomes the case. And so I'm wondering if how I don't know if I have a strict question around this, to tell you the truth. I'm trying to think through really what I said is the kind of translocality of or globalness or planetariness, right, of the concept of Afrofuturism in ways in which global Black idioms, languages, forms, concepts work within genres of Afrofuturism, right? So, within the artists that you talked about, they're hip hop artists, right? The hip hop, ostensibly Black American, though we can argue, what is that really, right? The community emerged from. And there's so many trans-local references rather than continent-based, strictly continental-based ideas informing an Afrofuturism. So I'm wondering, if anything, could you speak to that translocality of the concept rather than the indigeneity or the striving for indigeneity in the concept of African futurism?
Yeah, that's a curious question, because I'm all about indigeneity. You know, I'm all about the fact that, yeah, we are rapping in our local languages, we are rapping in our local accents, we are rapping about our particularities and how those are impacted by these imaginaries of Afrofuturism, you know. I don't think that, yeah, I appreciate the idea of translocality. I also am not, I don't sort of see a UK-based, North American sense of Afrofuturism as opposed to, you know, African continent sense Afrofuturism as kind of in any kind of competition, you know? And I guess, yeah, at its, you know, at its broad sort of conjuncture, I suppose, it is the maintenance, the imagination of a continuing, the fact of continuing Black life, basically. And how these different, so that I feel like is the translocal kind of connection, but, and then how those imaginations are expressed are particularly local, you know. Yeah, I hope that approaches an answer. Yeah, I guess I've also never really thought of, I guess I've never really thought of these ideas as in conflict with each other. Well, not conflict necessarily, but they simply, it's neither good nor bad, it's different, you know? Yeah. And I think what's curious about, I mean, I write about hip hop primarily. In, you know, Last Angel of History, Greg Tate, you know, famously said, like, and actually Kodo Oshun has mentioned this as well, like, first of all, that music is the perfect vehicle for the expression of Afrofuturism. Greg Tate specifically talking about the engagement with technology, the engagement of MCs with turntables, putting your hand on vinyl, the vinyl as an historical sonic archive. That is the ultimate expression of Afrofuturism. So it's like, okay, so does everything any MC or turntablist does, is that Afrofuturism necessarily? And I mean, it comes to this, yeah, you know, it just comes like the sort of point I made is like, listen, every time you see a DeLorean, is that Afrofuturism, you know? And who amongst us are old enough to remember what a DeLorean is? So, 88 miles an hour is not that fast. But like, does every expression of Black desire to instantiate life now become Afrofuturism, you know? So I do think, listen, it's not everything is everything. We kind of need to make some distinctions, but how do we actually go about them, basically?
Thank you.
Who is next? Sure.
Hi, Ward. Thanks for this. I saw the first version and I like the second version as well.
Thanks for coming back.
Really quick, to kind of two-part question. The first one is really just clarification. Did you say that the first example that you showed was filmed in Botswana?
Yeah. So, yes, it was. And the reason I picked that is because it really is, certainly in hip hop, like when this track came out, you know, when I was coming up, this was the track, you know, and it was spectacular because this was the first African hip hop group to be signed by an American label, and yeah, the first group to specifically, you know, enjoin the sort of advocacy for indigeneity. Racial dynamics, you know, blackness, coloredness, brownness, how do these sort of components all work together, and also then specifically engaging with technology and this presentation of Afrofuturism, right? So that doesn't really answer the question. Yes, it was filmed in Botswana. They were primarily Johannesburg-based, There were a core of 6 members called Cashless Society, but then also they were part of like an extended network called THC, which was the Hardcore Cashless Society, which included MCs in Kenya, Nigeria, different parts of Africa. I'm not sure exactly why they happened to be in Botswana, because they were primarily based in Joburg. Yeah.
Well, and that was the second part of the question. I think it's interesting that they're based, that they based the video there. The other thing that I was thinking is that all the examples that you offer, right, whether it be like Wakanda, whether it be a core of fours, like a lot of her texts, but the Goon specifically I'm thinking of, right, and the Cashless Society, all of these contexts are based in context of like heavy extractive economies, right? Almost definitionally so. Right?
Yeah.
Not like in the past, not removed in any kind of way, but like almost defined by like, extractive practices. So I was wondering if you're thinking about like a relationship between like, speculative aesthetic practices and the context of like extraction.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I guess whenever you think of Joburg, maybe the idea of an extractive economy, you're thinking of Mbembe and Nuttall's work. I've never really thought of it in the context of kind of an extractive economy from that perspective. It's also, I guess it's tricky, and like what was tricky for me when proposing even the idea of waywardness is like, well, is it particularly gendered? Does this idea then work for a male MC who happens to be doing the same stuff? Or another MC coming up is Zulu Mecca, who perhaps engages in this sort of historical references with contemporary references, but it's not necessarily Afro-mythic, you know? It is African-based, but not necessarily Afro-mythic. There's a lot of Islamic references. How do these kind of proposals apply in other spaces? I've actually never thought of the extractive economy component of it. It's very obvious. It's very obviously demonstrated in Cashless Society's work. I would certainly consider it, yeah. I mean, I guess the other thing that I was thinking of when you mentioned Dede Okorafor was like, in a previous iteration of this paper, I simply used waywardness, connecting that to Yugen Blackrock, and connecting that to the narrative of Binti, Dede Okorafor's work. But at the end of it, the only thing people remembered was Binti, you know? And so it's also kind of tricky to be like, well, there's Afrofuturism, there's African Afrofuturism, but I write about music, but I write about hip hop. So like getting to these very specific ideas about like research at this very tiny bottom of Africa, part of the world, has also been kind of a challenge to demonstrate, I suppose. So one more question if you want to go. Or
I do think we actually are out of time, although people are welcome to stay.
Oh,
We have
okay.
a minute. Thanks so much for joining us, and remember next week we're welcoming Jera Kajabi and Representative Samba Balde to talk about